Great. Okay, welcome, guys. So I'm delighted to be joined by Elton Ollerhead from ASOS again to the stage, Ezekiel Taiwo, who's a client partner lead at Deliveroo, and Jessica Chapplow, who's managing partner and head of e-commerce at Reprise Digital, and Stacy Gratz, regional marketing director for media at Dunnhumby. Thanks for joining me, guys. I suppose this session we're really going to focus on where retail media can carve out its place on a media plan, and so we've got a few different perspectives to cover. And I was going to start with some stats about retail media's rise and how it's going to be the fastest growing media channel this year, but Paul Floyer stole all of my stats, so I won't repeat them. So we're just going to dive straight in. And I guess, Stacy, how would you say retail media has changed over the last year? And if there are any other changes, guys, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so can you hear me? Yep. So I work specifically on Tesco Media at Dunnhumby, and we were just talking offline over here about how far ahead the US is in terms of they're about 2 years ahead. Oh, that doesn't sound good. About how the US is about 2 years ahead of us. And so even a year ago, we were just feeling like there was so much we had to do. But I think from our perspective, specifically, what's changed is we've just been able to grow all of the different product offerings we have and partnerships. We have Jay here in the room from ITV. Sorry, putting me on the spot. But just how we've been able to just expand overall in terms of product offerings, both on-site, in-store, and our off-site partnerships. And I think also just there's so much more, this past year's been a lot about education, both on the agency side and the client side, about what retail media can actually do, and bringing it out of just that shopper marketing focus.
That's really interesting. And Jessica, on the agency side, how have you seen retail media kind of in the conversation change?
Yeah, I think it's been a really interesting time at the moment just because there's been so much fluctuation and evolution with what we're seeing across retail media networks. Like, we've already seen that shift between, brands becoming more like publishers and in that network effect way, and then on the flip side as well. I think what we've also been really interested in is that retail media networks aren't anything new by any means, but what is interesting is that the sophistication of them is massively taking off, especially if we think about the last 18 months. We're seeing a lot more refinement in terms of the data story, the propositions, and also the teams that are being built out, where it's not just retail skill sets that we're seeing on the other side who are also upskilling our teams. It's actually media experts embedded within, and that's been really crucial in terms of helping us plug into that upskilling initiative within our agency and also for our clients as well.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you both kind of mentioned education and upskilling, and I mean, Deliveroo is quite as we mentioned in our briefing call, Zeke is quite a new entrant to this market. You must have seen a lot of change in a very short space of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like to use the term, we are flying a plane as we build it. So it means the pace of change and development is just wild at the moment. I'd say, to what's already been shared, the change or the past year, from my experience, is that the buyers have more experience, more campaigns under the belt, have higher expectations around targeting, measurability, et cetera, et cetera. So at Deliveroo, we are, dare I say, catching up, but it means that what we are building right now, we can be quite daring and innovative and be thinking 5 years ahead, and whereby that means there are some shortfalls in capabilities for brands who are working very closely with us. It means that we can build something and grow together. To your point earlier, that we can grow this space by building something that addresses your pain points and challenges from the off, and then grow into that.
And Elton, I think we mentioned earlier in our interview that there was targeting and measurement capabilities kind of coming in, and that being a big source of demand from advertisers. Is there any other kind of changes that you have been seeing in the market that you might want to emulate from, or that ASOS is eyeing up?
For sure. I mean, for one thing, I think the capability within the buying side of the equation, media agencies, clients, it's very it's a lot more sophisticated than it was a few years ago. It's not a hard sell anymore, that's for sure. You know, selling sponsored ads into a brand or display ads and so on, apart from a bigger creative solution offering. I think the expectation is that retail media platforms actually have these capabilities up and running and, you know, extremely well connected to the data, that's really where many are playing a bit of catch up. And that's from a technical perspective, you know, getting the right tech in, either building it or partnering with companies like Criteo and other leading retail media platforms, or you know, building it yourself, which is, you know, a costly business and a big investment by a company that has to be a kind of reasonable size. So it's very much the tech, but also that measurement and the targeting capability.
And do you think, I suppose this is a question kind of for all of you, but that kind of expectation of where you want to be compared to where you are, is that the biggest challenge at the moment, or are there other challenges that are kind of out there in the retail media space?
It's probably a time challenge, because I think we all want to be at a certain point. You know, some big players in the industry have done a great job at advancing their capabilities over the past 5 years, and there is an expectation that everyone's at the same level.
Yeah, and I would say from just with retail media, I guess specifically when I'm talking about Tesco and grocery brands, is that there's so many channels. So you've got in-store radio, you've got magazine, you've got on-site, off-site. It's about, the expectation is that all of that needs to be connected and to create like have a view of the customer through the entire way through. And so that's where we're really putting pressure on ourselves to make sure we're able to tell that story to brands and provide the right measurement solutions.
Yeah, a unique challenge on our part is that Deliveroo, we are an aggregator of retailers, so we don't actually own or manage the menus that our users will see. That's both across the restaurant business and grocery business as well. So one of the unique challenges is distribution, making sure that the products and the SKUs are actually available on the platform, because it may be in the Tesco down the road in store, but they have not uploaded that to Deliveroo. So there's a lot of work that we have to do alongside our retailers to support our brands to make sure the products are there on the menus, and then using the media to drive that. So it's often a push approach, and then the pull through awareness and creating a demand, so that if a local convenience store is selling out of M&Ms every Friday night, they're going to put more M&Ms on the site. So we have to balance the communication on both sides.
And Jessica, what I was wondering, because obviously we've got 3 different kind of retail media kind of networks represented, but here, when you're talking to advertisers or clients, what are the most common questions or demands that they have that a retail media network has to provide for them?
Yeah, I think it kind of going to what Elton was touching on earlier as well, that idea of, it's not that difficult to sell it in by any means, but I think justification is a whole other element, and justifying the value, the efficiency of retail media, that is often like the questions that we get up front, is how do we justify it on the plan, like where is the positioning? One of the common misconceptions we also see is that it tends to reside more in the optimization and just purely as an activation tactic, when actually retail media as a whole is a strategic play that sits far more upstream. And I think there's also the elements of like the ROAS trap, which controversially some people may or may not agree with, but from what I see is finding other ways to focus not just on the lower funnel, but actually driving that momentum from what I like to call like in-market customers to in the basket moments, and closing that gap, what that looks like. And I think the value that we derive from retail media as well, beyond ROAS equations, there's some really great soft benefits as well that come into play when we think about like competitor lockout periods, incremental merchandising opportunities, and just like the wider kind of like the shopper consumer studies that we can get back as well. So it's really stitching together the different elements that make retail media really powerful, that actually some we can quantify in more like black and white terms, and others we actually just have to create more of a strategic play around those two.
Mm-hmm. So it should be seen as like a full funnel or that what is exactly the kind of the misconception is that it can only do sales and it can't do anything else?
Yeah, and I think that comes back to where the budgets come from as well, right? Because they come from shopper and trade majoritively. So actually justification around those teams resides in sales and revenue. Whereas actually when we open it up further, and this probably comes to like the future of retail media as well, is being able to attribute from different areas of the business and taking those budgets and fueling them into retail media campaigns. But at the moment, we see that it really does reside in the lower funnel, and actually we see more success in terms of efficiency, as well as minimizing like wastage, and with portfolio brands, maximizing your presence between your brands as well from a cross-sell and upsell strategy when it's full funnel.
I was going to say that typically retail media platforms start with the low funnel ad tech. You've got sponsored ads in search, and you've got retargeting display ads. But ASOS kind of started the other way around with we conceptualize how brands showcase themselves, and we've had to play catch up in the kind of how that gets delivered to the brand, the customers, because we've got great production teams. We really understand the brand. We help them position their brand to a 20-something audience in a slightly different way than you might see on their own sites. But then we have to put together the right delivery mechanism with the ad product suite and plan that out effectively. And then, of course, how do you target and measure that? Those are the kind of catch-up elements that we've been playing. But we've had this very rich kind of brand-focused approach to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add, same experience on our side. Being such a nascent business, we are starting to work with e-commerce teams, shopper marketing. It's very much activation. How do I get this SKU on this menu to drive sales? Deliveroo is by first a marketplace. So the conversation we use to drive it towards an upper funnel is to really get our brands to think about the user being in market versus being in basket. And it's also about educating the other touch points that Deliveroo have to try and drive trial and consumptions. For example, we do a lot of sampling for brands who may be launching NPDs or want to drive upsell to a new premium product. Literally, when you've ordered your food, we'll drop a sample into the bag as a surprise and delight. So that brings that awareness to then drive repurchase bottom funnel. But retail media, when we really are strategic about the multiple touch points, and Deliveroo naturally being more of an emotional purchase, sometimes impulse, distress, versus traditional transactional. I have a shopping list. I dare not mess with my brands too much because the household is going to kick off. So there's an opportunity for brands to really turn up more creatively to get people to think, have you tried this one, or why not pay a bit extra as well?
So brands should be getting more creative with retail media, and retail media is more than just a sponsored listing or a display ad. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, and we've had some really good interactions with clients that are understanding that it's not just shopper, and shopper is great. Don't get me wrong, but there are opportunities for brand and e-commerce team, and so we've got great clients like Heineken and Pepsi and L'Oreal who are organizing themselves. All of the really big brands are trying to figure out how do we organize ourselves so that we can bring retail media together and have a holistic plan rather than it just sitting with one team. So what we've found a lot of success with is just meeting with those clients earlier, getting those conversations in a lot earlier than we would have in the past, setting up a learning agenda so that all of those different, at the beginning of the conversation, so that when we get to the plans, we're ticking off everything that needs to be accomplished from a brand perspective, e-com and shopper standpoint. But it's a totally different way of working with clients than we have in the past. But we're finding that it's really helpful, and that our clients are starting to organize themselves in that way as well.
Mm-hmm. And I was just going to say on that kind of building the brand aspect, the challenge that some of the brands have on retail media platforms is that brands can actually make quite a splash. Not easily, but it's possible to make a bit of a splash. You've got fairly kind of smallish challenger brands that come through with really good campaigns and gain market share easily. At ASOS, we had a really good campaign with Sol de Janeiro, which was a kind of a body cosmetic brand, is a cosmetic brand. And we did a really interesting campaign in positioning with diversity and kind of a broad range of different sizes of models, to buck the stereotype of, what a kind of beach body should look like. We had a very diverse imagery, and it really allowed Sol de Janeiro to kind of put together this fantastic campaign that we could showcase across the ad products and really kind of build that brand out of, not out of nowhere, but really kind of punch above its weight.
Yeah, and I guess with that seems like it's kind of that content ad kind of sort of blurring the lines, I guess, that would get results. But we haven't actually discussed first-party data quite yet, and I know that a few of the sessions have talked about it. But from your perspective, what do you think? How can it be used effectively? And because I guess people see it as like this gold mine, right? So how can you use it effectively?
We've already started working with brands on clean room solutions, so some of the things that InfoSum was talking about earlier, and our partnerships with CTV as well. So I think, as brands are looking to a cookieless future, they're also being tasked with collecting a lot of first-party data. So we have to be prepared on our side to have the right clean room solutions in place so that we're all working with the relevant partners in that space. But the way that we're looking at it is in the future. So right now we are looking at how you can enhance your audiences, but then also on the platforms where they may already be spending money, so Meta, Pinterest, etc., ITV. But then also how can we take that clean room solution and that first party data and have it live on our owned platforms as well? So we have a really cool product called Scan As You Shop, where you can go through the store and we serve up ads based on your club card data. And so what if we were able to use the brand's first party data as well? So it's really powerful to bring together the recency of our shopper data and then the brand's data as well. So we're just working through all the different solutions, but I would say that all of the big brands are very keen to do more in this area.
Is that what you're hearing on your side, Jessica, as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that refining that kind of strategy and story around data, especially through data clean rooms, is like the real opportunity that we'll continue to see a lot more traction in, specifically when we think about the ways that actually they open up the ability to really offer that additional granularity with melding together like data sources between brand and retailer data. It's incredibly powerful when we can look to synergize what that means for our campaigns. And I think when we think about the place that retail media has, it also can help bring teams closer together, because we often see that there are teams that work to different objectives across marketing, commerce. It's not as much of a shared responsibility as it could or it should be, but really like these types of data-driven plays will now allow a lot more brands and clients that we're definitely talking to get that shared responsibility all working together and that visibility as well. And I think when we have more campaigns that are moving between, like we said, brand building and actually like SKU level precision, that's allowing us to drive a lot more of like the outcome-based media that we want to be collecting those different data points between like platforms, like especially when we think about retail media, it's a double-edged sword with all of the wealth of intelligence we can collect through club card data, shopper data, but actually being able to make sure that we're being consistent across different touch points, different attribution windows and methodologies. Like data clean rooms really allow us to get that bird's eye view in a much more refined way.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to just say, with all the kind of metrics out there at the moment, and various retail media companies and agencies and so on, the alignment of definitions of metrics is going to be an important journey we need to go on. There's some industry bodies who are trying to start that conversation in, how do we get a standard definition of lifetime value of a customer or a new to brand customer, etc. The minute we can start standardizing those to a degree, which it might be hard to do it completely, but if we move towards a more standardized set of definitions across retailers, brands, and agency buyers, etc., you then start talking a more common language where you can then start comparing across different retail media networks as a brand, which I think is powerful. And then the other thing was, that you also need to think about, that ROAS metric where you've got different price points of products being bought. If someone buys a North Face coat for 300 quid, ROAS can look pretty good on a campaign, whereas if you're buying a face and body cosmetic for £5, you have to start turning to a new to brand metric, or maybe a lifetime value metric that makes evaluating campaigns more meaningful.
Because of the different price points and all of those different...
Yeah, the price, it just makes, if you look at ROAS on a cosmetics campaign or typical CPG items, it really is not a very favourable metric to use.
Yeah, interesting. I am going to open up to questions. So this is your kind of little first warning to have a think. Raise your hand, there will be a roving mic. So just in case anyone does have questions, we'll be taking them in a couple of minutes. I guess also, while we talk about metrics and first-party data, that it kind of, in my head, sits under a sort of a technological innovation kind of in that sort of bucket. Are there any sort of technological innovations in retail media that this audience needs to know about that might change how you think about retail media on a plan?
I'd say, without speaking specifically to the technology, I'm thinking more so the expectations of consumers and just the public, because the pace of change in tech and development now is just wild. So when I think about how technology can, or adapting the right technologies that would enable us to really use that gold mine we're sitting on, which is the data, the expectation is already there, so we need to meet that. And I don't think, if we do have the right technology, I don't think we're too far away from the scene where I'm watching my football team give away the semi-final of the Europa League, and at half-time I get an ad on my connected TV to buy Heineken, and that arrives on demand, because we can do that at Deliveroo before the second half, so that way I'm a bit more chill.
It can happen for you. You just need to buy through us in ITV. We can do this for you.
There you
and
go.
Heineken's in the room, so we can make it all happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So using the info sums where we all put our data together and make that become real. As a consumer, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I'll give you more of my data. So yes, there's the use of the data for measurability and analytics, but really creating that experience for our consumers is I think,
that value exchange, enforcing that.
Yeah, I was, I've been, so I was started at Dunnhumby 10 months ago, so not long. But when I was coming from a brand that didn't have a lot of first-party data. But I spent the majority of my career at Amex, where you had like that incredible closed-loop spend data. We always said you should start a dating app with that information. But so anyway, my point is, it's like the amount of data that we're sitting on is just absolutely incredible. It's just using it, like you say, in the right way. And like at Dunnhumby, we have 40 data scientists just working on the Tesco data to make sure that we're bringing up the right content for the right people. And it's just having that, less about the tech, but more just that focus on the customer and always keeping that customer mindset, because none of these companies, none of us started as media companies. We're trying to become media companies, and you don't want to lose sight of the customer experience when you start to monetize a lot of your assets. But yeah, with AI, and we've been working with AI for years, and that's just obviously going to become incredible in terms of the type of deterministic measurement that we'll be able to provide even like 6 months to a year from now.
Yeah, I think the AI boom that we've already been seeing for quite some time just continues to be an area where, particularly for agencies as well, looking at the elements of targeting and how we can move beyond predictive analytics in even more interesting and powerful ways will absolutely be pushed by machine learning, particularly when we think about where consumers sit in their interactive like shopper journeys, is actually how can, as we move to like generative AI futures, how can that almost predict the next best action and step a customer should be making in their path to purchase. That's something that we'll definitely continue to see more of. And it's incredibly interesting, but I guess my standpoint is how do we do that ethically, where we prioritize performance as well as ethics in the same breath, and we're not doing one over the other. And then also how do we make sure that we're doing it in ways that actually have the right disclaimers for consumers as well. I was speaking to a IP competition law firm the other day, and we were talking about if you have a generative AI system that then creates misinformation through product descriptions and copy that's inaccurate, where does the blame for that sit? And it always will sit with the brand and the retailer. So preparing for these types of fallouts as well is going to be the key area to navigate those consumer expectations or technological advancements as well.
I was going to say that retailers, and a point that you made just now about the we're not necessarily media businesses, or first and foremost, but we're trying to be nowadays. The kind of product content and the personalization of that content is probably some way ahead of the ads targeting in some companies, where you've had lots of data science resource kind of deployed to really refine an offering. When you enter a retail media site, the site I see might not be the same site you see based on previous purchase and browse behavior, but the kind of linking that up with the same level of sophistication on the ad side, especially when the ad side of the business is probably a little bit more immature, there's a bit of a mismatch. And then also the privacy aspect is making sure that you've got the right consent. I mean, that is a pretty big minefield that companies need to be extremely kind of focused on, making sure you've got the right consent, not only for the targeting, but also the measurement and tracking side. It's quite a complex thing to do, and also to make sure that the customers get the right message that doesn't confuse or put them off as well.
Turn them off the brand.
Exactly, right, yeah.
Just while we've got a few minutes left, does anyone have any questions they want to ask? I've got a hand up over here. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and your company and who the question's for when the mic reaches you, that would be great.
Hello, it was really interesting. It's I'm not sure this is working, but I'll just sort of shout anyway. It's Simon Redican from PAMCO. If you accept that marketing budgets are finite and the proposition is that retail media is going to grow quickly, where do you foresee the funding from retail media coming from?
I was going to say, hopefully it's from a mix of shopper, brand, and e-com. And I think as we're moving into sort of an uncertain financial future where retail media does feel like a safe bet right now in terms of our ability to truly measure that full funnel engagement and get all the way down to the actual purchase. But I think right now the majority sits in a little bit in e-com, a lot in shopper, but we're hoping to move it more into the brand as well, because there's so many solutions that would help brands.
Zeke, would you say?
Yeah, pretty much. Plus one on that, it's very much shopper, e-com. And we need to do the right things to ensure we are providing performance at that level. Everything we've discussed is about driving sales, but ultimately it's that brand to e-commerce or brand to demand conversation, isn't it? That the more we can help brands turn up, build affinity, drive consideration through the additional touch points, and we're doing the right things on the performance level, that should be capturing that demand rather than trying to create it and capture it at the same time. So yeah, talk to more brand teams as well.
I think, Jessica, we were talking about how budgets should be more fluid than they are in our prep call.
Absolutely. I was going to say, I think another way to approach that is not just like the finite nature of budgets, but also is the methodology at which we approach budget allocation and how to remain agile, right? So a lot of the conversations we have is not even about which which team's going to give us the money, which team's going to sign off the PO. It's actually how do we create the methodology to look at like the profitability exercise between your SKUs, where we're going to be allocating like the right campaigns via seasonality, etc. And then how can we come up with the right allocation path optimization strategy? And that helps us maximize like what that logic looks like between, so that we avoid the kind of tug of war between different brand budgets and department budgets rather.
I was going to say that on the brand side, it's also about the brand teams speaking to the shopper marketing teams, or maybe even a notch higher than that, where you start considering how can deployment of brand budget help drive retail across a variety of different retail media platforms. Because often, you might find a brand team is spending money on a certain campaign that is linked to sales of that kind of product on retail media platforms. Whereas if they'd spoken, if there's a bit of better connection on the brand side as well as on the retail media side, you could probably get a better result with a more coordinated deployment of that budget.
Okay. Any more questions? We've got one more here. We're running a bit ahead, so we've got some more time than the clock tells us.
I'm John Mundy from Vistar Media. So I'm on the digital out-of-home side of things and programmatic out-of-home. And we're seeing more and more CPG brands beginning to buy digital out-of-home media programmatically. Obviously, as an American business, you mentioned earlier, Stacy, how far advanced retail media is in the States compared to elsewhere. And we're seeing, obviously, networks like Grocery TV in the States that are significant and have got scale, and CPG brands are activating on that. I'm curious, and this is partly aimed at Stacy from your sort of Tesco, Dunnhumby side of things, where Tesco is the physical media owner of screens in stores and have been experimenting, I know, with that over time. Where you see that going and how, and it's also, I think, from the other side, the impact of physical media on you guys, for Deliveroo particularly, but equally ASOS, where you see that going and how you see the data that you guys bring in activating for CPG brands who may be doing shopper marketing with you guys, but haven't, the crossover between shopper and digital out of home is becoming more blurred because of the rise of platforms like ours. And I wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, we have a partnership with Deco, and then we have our own in-store as well. I think we're only looking to expand that, and that's where something like that makes sense for a brand team to be for having digital out of home. I think because we have 20 million plus club card users, that we can access, or we reach 20 million households, and there are 27 million in the UK. So it's hugely representative of the UK market. So when you think about that, it's thinking about just, you can use that for your Tesco plans, but then also you can using those insights to plan your overall UK media plan, and that can inform things like digital out of home because you've got that shopper behavior, you've got location data. So we're looking at ways that we can expand that out of. It's not just I shouldn't say not just Tesco, but I mean like using that data for offsite and non-endemic as well.
Yeah,
That answers your question.
Yeah, just to add, really excited question on our part because we are just launching a digital on the back of riders, so we'll be able to run ads based on zone 1, 2 distribution. So I can imagine if we're looking at certain stores and you have already a campaign running with Jason Deco, that we can then target our riders in that zones to be zipping around with a creative there as well. So out of home is an area that we are very excited about, and we're still building that proposition, but we do see the the headroom for growth there.
Yeah, lots of change in the future. That's about all we have time for. Big applause for my panel. We're about to go to lunch.
Thank you.